Corey Harrison collapsed in court, tears streaming down his face as he faced the painful truth. His father, Rick Harrison, the familiar face of Pawn Stars, and his longtime friend Chumlee were both sentenced to life in prison. The verdict echoed in the courtroom, leaving not only Corey but the entire world stunned. Rick, who had once built a famous pawn empire, now faced the reality of spending the rest of his life behind bars for human trafficking and money laundering. His downfall wasn't just a shock to his family, but to the millions of fans who had followed him. However, it wasn't just the sentence that was so shocking, but Corey's raw breakdown that left everyone speechless. While many might have thought a son could remain strong through such challenges, seeing Corey collapse and sob uncontrollably made the entire courtroom fall silent. His emotional testimony not only opened a painful new chapter in the Harrison family's story, but also revealed troubling details about what truly happened behind the scenes of the famous television show. Welcome to the channel. If you find this story interesting, leave a comment with the number 1, and if not, leave a comment with the number 0. Don't forget to hit like, share this video with your friends and everyone around you. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any truly exciting stories and shocking revelations in the future. Now, let's dive into today's story. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the drop of a pin. The judge's voice cut through the silence like a sharp blade. Finally, Rick Harrison. For his crimes, this court sentences him to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. No words, no breath, no movement, until a choking sob echoed from the front row. Corey Harrison, the son of the man just sentenced, a face once familiar to millions of viewers of Pawn Stars every week, now tear-streaked and trembling, barely able to stand. He clenched a crumpled tissue in one hand, the other pressing hard against his mouth as if to stifle the scream that had nowhere to escape. Then came the second blow. Austin Lee Russell, known to the public as Chumlee, was also sentenced to life in prison. The courtroom stirred with soft, collective gasps, a sense of disbelief. Some still couldn't reconcile the sentences with the men they had seen, laughing, negotiating, and charming their way through television contracts and antique treasures. But this wasn't TV. This was reality. And the gravity of what had just happened had finally caught up with the truth. Just 10 feet from the defense table, Corey turned toward the courtroom, his red eyes, slumped shoulders, and a heart clearly shattered as he collapsed into the arms of a family friend. It was a moment too raw, too painful for even the reporters to lift their cameras. This wasn't just the fall of a reality TV star. It was the collapse of a legacy, a father-son empire now permanently tarnished by the darkest crimes imaginable, human trafficking and money laundering. And as America watched in horror, one question rose above the noise, echoing louder than any headline. Why didn't we see this coming? The legend of fame and the men behind it. For years, Pawn Stars had been one of the most beloved shows on the History Channel, a show about a family-run pawn shop in Las Vegas, dealing in everything from Civil War relics to classic collectibles. Little did people know, the show was lighthearted, fun, with strange and lovable characters, yet practical. Rick Harrison was the face of it all, smart, straightforward, with a passion for history. His son Corey, muscular, rebellious at times, and then there was Chumlee, always getting into trouble but never crossing the line, or so he thought. Together they had built not just a TV show but a brand, a cultural platform, a money-making machine. And now, it all lay in ruins. What makes this collapse so devastating isn't just the crime, But the deception, the betrayal of trust from millions who welcomed them into their homes, treated them like family, cheered for their success. No one saw the hidden layers beneath the surface. No one saw the young women lured in by empty promises. No one saw the secret money trails leading to offshore accounts and illegal transactions. No one saw the darkness simmering beneath the laughter, cameras, applause, and deal closings, except one person, a woman, her identity still protected. A woman who knew Rick very well and claimed he confessed to her not out of guilt, but pride. The confession changed everything, according to court records and leaked sworn affidavits. It all began one evening of drinking. Rick boasted, in fact, he thought he was untouchable. The cameras, the fans, how people lit up when they saw him. He was a god in Las Vegas, but also a man with flaws. He told me he made more money behind the scenes than he ever did on the show. The woman claimed, "I asked him, 'How do you laugh?' He replied, 'Not everything I do is filmed, darling.'" That wasn't the worst part. When she pieced everything together, strange late-night messages, sudden trips out of state, unreasonable cash withdrawals, she began connecting the dots. And once she did, she realized she couldn't ignore it any longer. She handed everything over to the authorities, and that one decision brought Rick Harrison and Chumlee's world to light like a poorly sewn quilt. The empire they had built, every deal, every camera, every transaction, was about to be exposed as a front for a criminal underground no one ever expected. On March 14th, when the FBI knocked on their door in the early morning, a day that should have been like any other, instead, federal agents surrounded Gold and Silver Pawn Shop. A coordinated raid that reflected a military campaign. Trucks carrying weapons, media flying overhead like vultures, sensing that something had died beneath the surface. Within hours, both Rick Harrison and Austin Chumlee Russell were in federal custody. What they found was staggering. Encrypted devices, fake passports, unregistered cash bundles, names of women on labor contracts that didn't match legal records, and a separate hard drive believed to contain footage used for coercion. And among all of this, there was one man who didn't know what he had been dragged into. Corey Harrison. Corey, the heir, the clueless pawn, he didn't know. At least that's what he said to the court. That's what he whispered through tears when he testified against himself. Dad. That's what he told himself while pacing back and forth in his room that night, trying to recall every moment, every conversation, every hint that something wasn't right. Corey grew up in the pawn shop world. He wasn't handed a silver spoon. He was handed a rusty spoon, taught to polish it, sell it, and make something of himself. But what happens when the man teaching you those lessons also teaches you to lie? "I want to believe it's all true," Corey told the jury, his voice choking. "I want to believe my dad was just smart in business. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know." But guilt doesn't need clarity. Guilt doesn't need proof of personal involvement. Sometimes guilt comes in the form of silence, turning a blind eye, not asking questions. You were too scared to know the answer. Why does this story matter more than ever? In a world where fame often acts as a shield, where reality TV stars become fake royalty, this story reminds us of something simple and chilling. You never really know who anyone is, especially when they're in front of the cameras. The case of Rick Harrison isn't just about two men going to prison. It's about how we, the public, are enchanted by charm, how easily we believe in a brand, how quickly we overlook red flags to support comfort, and, most painfully, about those who are hurt, while everyone laughs along to a reality show that hides something horrifying. This is the story of betrayal, justice, and the price of silence. A story that started in the bright lights of a pawn shop and ended in the cold gray cement of a prison cell. And as the cameras fade, one man, Corey Harrison, is left in the rubble, trying to rebuild what's left of himself. It didn't start with fame. It didn't start with reality TV cameras or the fleeting appearance of a celebrity or millions of dollars in collectibles. It started like many American stories, with a struggle in Las Vegas in the early 1980s, a city sparkling with sin and neon lights. But behind the bright lights were families struggling to make a living. Richard Benjamin Harrison, known as an old man who moved to Vegas with his family, struggling to make ends meet after a series of tough moments. He didn't care about fame. He cared about survival. It was here, in the dusty, unpredictable desert city, that the Harrison family planted the seeds that would one day grow into an empire. A single pawn shop, Gold and Silver Pawn, opened in 1989. No frills, no gimmicks, just a father and son buying and selling anything that came through the door. And it was Rick Harrison, the son of that old man, who saw what most people didn't. He wasn't just selling old guitars and dusty coins. He saw opportunity in the stories behind the items. He knew that history was being sold, and people loved the stories. In the early 2000s, the shop created a wave in Vegas. The locals knew it as a reliable place with solid but fair negotiations. Rick, with his vast knowledge of antiques, became the face of the shop, and he wasn't alone. His son Corey, just a teenager at the time, was being prepared to inherit the family business. But Rick didn't stop at selling goods. He had a vision. What if the world could watch what happens behind the counter? What if the unique characters, rare items, and intense negotiations could become something bigger? He pitched the idea for years, facing rejection after rejection, but Rick didn't give up. Finally, his persistence paid off in 2009 when the History Channel gave them a chance. A new type of reality TV show was born: Pawn Stars. At first, no one expected much. Another show about a niche industry expected to live and die quietly under the shadow of bigger titles. But the magic hit instantly. Rick's grumpy wisdom, Corey's youthful perspective, and Chumlee's goofy antics, a friend of Corey's who was known more for comic relief than actual pawnbroking, all blended into a formula. America couldn't stop watching this explode. Within months, Pawn Stars became a cultural phenomenon, and not only viewers showed up, but celebrities like George Stephanopoulos, Bob Dylan, and even presidents and athletes appeared as guests or sent items to the pawn shop. The Gold and Silver Pawn Shop became a tourist attraction, with fans lining up outside just to catch a glimpse of their favorite reality TV star. Rick Harrison had become the king of this newly found kingdom. He didn't just sell items. He told the story behind every Civil War rifle, every Elvis signature, every classic Coca-Cola sign, turning them into anchors for the past. Viewers learned while they laughed, and the History Channel struck gold. Ironically, through a pawn shop, Corey was thrust into the spotlight. He had grown up in the shadows of the shop, now suddenly flooding millions of homes across the world. Viewers loved his straightforward demeanor. He was the modern muscle of the operation, youthful, a bit bold, but sharp. And then came Chumlee Austin Russell, Corey's childhood friend, who quickly transitioned from backstage assistant to fan favorite. His cluelessness was used for laughs. He was clumsy, teased, but the audience adored him. He was the lovable fool in a world of sharp salespeople. Together, the four men became more than colleagues. They became characters in a world that was supposed to have no script. Their boundaries blurred. Their characters became reality, and with fame came unimaginable wealth. Rick quickly capitalized on it. He was no longer just a pawn shop owner. He was an author, a speaker, and an investor. He opened restaurants, signed endorsement deals, and started side businesses. Chumlee opened his own candy store and sold designer goods. Corey also embraced the celebrity lifestyle, luxury cars, red carpets, exclusive events. But it wasn't just about the big things, it was about the daily money. Lines of people outside the shop, fast-moving products on the shelves, autographs, meet and greets. The gold and silver pawn shop was said to rake in thousands of dollars every day, sometimes reaching hundreds of thousands at peak seasons. Business was booming. Behind the scenes, Rick maintained tight control. He managed the show, staff, and finances, while Chumlee played the fool. Rick was always watching, always planning, always expanding. For a time, everything seemed perfect. But perfection doesn't live in the mask, and as time passed, that mask began to crack. Small signs started appearing. Rumors, silent staff turnover, inventory losses, whispers about backstage deals. But no one wanted to hear it, not when the show was still drawing millions, not when Rick had become something of a national treasure, not when the illusion was far more enticing than the reality. Corey was also caught up in it. He trusted his father. He trusted Chumlee. These were the men he had grown up with, the men who had built him into who he was. He didn't ask too many questions about why they did what they did. Everything was fine, but not everyone around them was blind. A few former employees had spoken up over the years, quietly and anonymously, claiming shady behavior, strange accounting practices, unusual guests who never appeared on camera. But there was no solid proof, and their warnings were dismissed as jealousy or bitterness, and those who were too curious didn't stay long. The Pawn Stars machine continued with new episodes, new seasons, broadcast contracts, international audiences, spin-offs, and documentaries. The legend of Rick Harrison as a smart but rude man, everyone's favorite history buff, was reinforced in pop culture. Corey was the contemplative son, Chumlee the clown with a golden heart. But behind the carefully selected front of television, the real story was smoldering, slowly, dangerously. The rise was as fast as a shooting star, but the fall would shake the earth. Because while America watched with popcorn in hand, the men behind the Pawn Stars were believed to be running business as usual, with no cameras allowed to record the business dealings that would ultimately cost them everything. And when the illusion shattered, Corey, the son caught in the middle, would have to choose between protecting the legacy or speaking out the truth. He chose the truth, and it broke him before the alarm bells, before the chains, and long before the courtroom lights turned Rick Harrison's face from a beloved businessman to a convicted human trafficker. There had been whispers. They didn't start with official complaints, but with uncomfortable glances, casual remarks, and stories shared over beers between late-night staffers. Subtle warnings that everyone overlooked because they didn't fit the story everyone had accepted. After all, how could a history-loving, jolly patriarch, a hit TV show be anything other than what he appeared to be? An accomplished businessman, a sharp negotiator, a reality TV icon. But the truth, as it always does, had leaked long before the headlines. Those who had worked at Gold and Silver Pawn before the fame remember a different Rick. Not evil, but controlling. A perfectionist. A man obsessed with two things: winning every deal and keeping control. He could be generous one day and ruthless the next. His mood was unpredictable, and that volatility affected how he ran the business. Then came the cameras. They changed everything. With them came the power of recognition. Money. Rick, who once stayed late to reorganize shelves and sweep floors, now walked with the air of someone untouchable. Corey noticed that, too. There were moments his dad seemed distant. Not physically, as he was still in the shop every day, but emotionally distant. There were side deals happening off-camera. Not every transaction was put on a show, of course, that was expected, but some were different. Some large amounts of cash were moved quietly. Some clients didn't want to be filmed, and Rick didn't object. He'd take them to the back room, lock the door, and go out alone. A few minutes later, no receipt, no item exchanged, and no one could remember. At first, no one asked why. The show was a cash cow. The shop was crowded with customers lining up around the block most weekends. Chumlee was becoming his own brand. Corey attended conventions and autograph signings. Everyone was winning. Still, there were oddities. A woman who worked inventory for 3 years left without notice and never answered calls or messages from her colleagues. She had once joked that Rick had more in the safe than just old coins. No one thought much about it at the time. Just another sarcastic remark from someone who spent too much time around antiques and drama. Then came a tech guy, an outside consultant hired to upgrade the shop's security cameras. According to a startling statement he later gave to a local reporter, there were blind spots in the shop, areas deliberately created where footage would mysteriously be cut or skipped altogether. He raised the issue directly with Rick. Rick was said to have responded, "Just fix what I told you to fix," and ended the contract a week later. Clients also had their stories. Some female clients said they were offered private appraisals after hours. One woman in her 20s at the time told a friend she was invited to a VIP pawn opportunity, only to find herself in an upstairs office alone with Rick and Chumlee. She said she felt uncomfortable, but no crime occurred. She quickly left and never returned. These stories were shared quietly, dismissed as rumors because when you stand in the presence of a celebrity, the truth has a funny way of becoming optional. The legend of Rick Harrison was too powerful to doubt, and for many years that legend protected him. But not everyone was fooled. A former producer from the show who worked in the early seasons before being abruptly fired later revealed that Rick insisted on controlling the final edits, not just for creative direction, but also to ensure certain scenes didn't air, scenes where conversations ventured into suspicious territory. A specific edit that the producer claimed involved a segment cut, where Rick asked a teenage girl there how much she was really selling a necklace for. The way he asked and the way he smiled didn't sit right with the film crew. It was edited out and never mentioned again. There were no reports, no accusations, no clear evidence, just discomfort. Then came the real estate deals. Rick had started purchasing multiple properties around Las Vegas. It wasn't unusual for a wealthy man like him, but some were kept secret through a shell company LLC, sourced from offshore accounts. The transactions were pretty quiet, with some homes rarely being used. Neighbors reported seeing young women come and go, but they assumed it was just Hollywood's eccentric lifestyle. However, a neighbor went to the police after hearing screams one night. No charges were brought, and the woman who was reportedly screaming was never seen again. Nothing of this was reported at the time, and no information reached Corey. He had been isolated, busy traveling, managing contracts, building a brand, filming episodes, drinking, and enjoying his newfound fame as part of America's TV dynasty. He trusted his father, he trusted Chumlee, but trusted his limits. And when strange moments began to appear, Corey started to feel uncomfortable. It wasn't one big event, but dozens of small ones. The times his father paid in cash for things that didn't need to be paid in cash, people showing up at family barbecues that no one could identify, how Chumlee started acting more closed off, reckless, and aggressive. There were also issues with money disappearing in 2021. Corey's accountant had flagged an anomaly in the business account. Nearly $600,000 was withdrawn over a 6-month period without any clear paperwork. Corey casually raised the issue with Rick over weekend breakfast. Rick laughed and said it was just business diversification, but when Corey asked for details, Rick changed the subject. Then came the moment Corey would never speak of publicly, a moment he later hinted at in court, but never explained further. According to the transcript, the judge asked him when he first suspected something might be wrong. Corey hesitated, then answered, "It was one night at the shop. After hours, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see." When pressed, he shook his head and said, "I don't want to talk about it." But it changed the way I viewed my father. That moment could have been the beginning of the end, the moment when denial was broken and doubt began to take root. Corey didn't leave the company immediately, but something inside him had changed. He began to question, dig deeper into the books, observe his father, listen more closely to the conversations he'd once ignored. What he discovered in the following year would leave him stunned to the core when the FBI came knocking. Corey wasn't surprised, he was heartbroken. But not surprised because deep inside, the whispers had become shouts, and once he stopped ignoring them, he could no longer pretend. The red flags had always been there, the missed signs, the quiet warnings, the people who tried to speak up and were dismissed. They were all part of the story, and the price for ignoring them, that price, was everything she hadn't planned to expose in public, at least not at first. Not really the woman who ultimately became the whistleblower at the center of Rick Harrison's downfall. She never intended to expose one of America's most famous reality TV stars. When she first entered his life, she saw him as charming, independent, smart, and successful. He had charisma, powerful connections, and above all, confidence. But beneath all that, she would soon discover something far more dangerous. The cruelty and arrogance about things that should have made any sensible person sick. Her relationship with Rick began in a familiar way. A chance encounter in Las Vegas, casual conversation, then frequent contact. She wasn't just a fan. She had her own background in marketing and collectibles, which intrigued Rick. He slowly brought her closer, first on a professional level, and not long after, their relationship became more ambiguous. She became his confidant, sometimes a romantic interest, sometimes an assistant, sometimes just someone to talk to in the middle of the night when the cameras stopped rolling and the public persona was stripped away. On one of those nights, with a bourbon glass in hand, Rick seemed unusually jubilant as he told her something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. He was boasting. She never forgot that part. He wasn't ashamed, he wasn't whispering, he wasn't confiding, he was boasting. According to her official testimony, he leaned in and said, "I have side jobs that the network will never understand." I've built an empire, darling, not just in this store, but in actually controlling real things with real money that I don't bring on camera. She thought he was joking, maybe drunk, maybe exaggerating. But then he continued. He talked about the homes he bought under false names, the girls there, the deals he brokered outside the walls of the pawn shop, how he had friends in high places, how no one dared to outsmart him. "It's like he needed me to know," she said later in an interview. "He wanted me to see how powerful he was, that he could get away with anything." He said something I'll never forget. "You think I've come this far? Play fair, please." At first, she rationalized it. Maybe that was the Vegas ego talking, the kind of bragging powerful men do to appear bigger than they really are. But the more time she spent with him, the more cracks she noticed. Strange late-night phone calls, sudden unexplained trips out of state, always urgent, always with cash transactions, thick envelopes with no clear reason. Young women sometimes barely of age coming in and out of his private office during hours when the shop should have been closed. One of them was crying. The woman started to ask questions, but Rick was always 2 steps ahead, knowing how to answer them. He called them business opportunities, exclusive consultants, private salespeople. He made her feel stupid for asking. "You don't understand? Don't understand the world I operate in?" And she wanted to believe him, because believing him meant not facing the truth that she might be sitting across from a man capable of trafficking people. But one night, everything changed. She unexpectedly arrived at one of Rick's private residences, a house he said was just a quiet place to get away from everything. But once there, she noticed something strange. There were cameras, but not the kind you'd expect. No doorbell cameras, no security alarms, just lenses pointed into the bedroom, the living area, and the hallway. All of them recorded expensive furniture, yet the rooms were strangely empty. No personal items, no photos, no clothes in the closets, as if people had come and gone but never really left. Then she found a drawer in a simple bedside table. Inside, she discovered 6 mobile phones with no identifiers, all powered off, from various brands, alongside foreign passports, mostly belonging to women from different countries, all seemingly under the age of 25. She didn't say a word. She left quickly. That night, she made a decision. She had been silent for far too long. She handed over what she had found to the authorities, and with that, became a key witness in a federal investigation that had quietly been tracking Rick Harrison for more than a year. Her testimony became the catalyst for a full-scale operation the FBI had suspected. Anonymous tips had leaked for years, but nothing concrete, nothing actionable. But this was the break they needed. A reliable source, physical evidence, first-hand accounts. The investigation moved swiftly. Undercover agents were sent to the pawn shop, surveillance was ramped up, phone records were pulled, finances were forensically examined. He wasn't just involved in shady deals, he was coordinating a human trafficking operation, using his reputation as a smokescreen. Women were recruited with promises of opportunity, modeling gigs, antique evaluations, even supposed appearances on the show. They were taken around the country and, in many cases, never heard from again. The money laundering operation was more sophisticated, involving offshore accounts, cryptocurrency transactions, and a network of LLCs scattered across the country. Chumlee, they discovered, was not just a bystander. He played a role, sometimes as a recruiter, sometimes as an enforcer, always close enough to Rick for things to continue, but far enough for plausible deniability. It was this whistleblower who provided investigators with their roadmap. And then, she was afraid. Rick had powerful connections, ties to law enforcement, political donors. He had once boasted to her that he could make a problem disappear faster than it appeared. She didn't know what that meant at the time. Now she feared she understood. For months, she lived in fear, changed her phone number, moved out of state, double-checked the locks every night. She wasn't just afraid of Rick. She was afraid of what it meant to speak out against someone so publicly beloved and admired. When the story finally broke, she watched the headlines from a cheap hotel room in Arizona, alone, waiting in anxiety. But when news confirmed Rick and Chumlee had been arrested, she cried, not out of joy or relief, but out of sorrow for the lives lost, the women hurt, and the innocence the world once believed existed behind the door of a pawn shop. Her identity remains sealed by court order. Even in the trial transcripts, she is only referred to by a pseudonym. The court valued her protection. So did the FBI. Because they knew that without her, none of this would have come to light. This was her confession, her courage, her voice in the dark that lifted the curtain. And it wasn't just what Rick had done that made her speak, but the fact that he bragged. He bragged. That's what haunted her most. Because in his eyes, it wasn't a crime. It was a victory. A show of power proving he had beaten the system, that he had fooled everyone. And for a long time, he had. But no more. She ended her sworn testimony with a single sentence, one that echoed long after the court delivered its verdict, one that still haunts her in every article, every interview, every recent press conference. The late-night special covered the case he never confessed to out of remorse. She said he confessed because he thought I'd be impressed. He was wrong, and now he'll spend the rest of his life in prison because someone had the courage to stop staying silent. It was a fresh Tuesday morning in Las Vegas. The sun had just begun to rise over the horizon, casting long shadows across streets bathed in neon lights. Locals were still sipping their first cups of coffee. Tourists were stumbling home after long nights of blackjack. The city's daily rhythm was just starting to stir. But at one specific address on the Las Vegas Strip, 713 South Las Vegas Boulevard, the storm had already arrived. Unmarked black SUVs turned the corner in perfect coordination, gliding like shadows, fast, silent, and without warning. FBI agents in tactical vests poured out with practiced precision. Some moved toward the back alley, others approached the main entrance of one of the most recognizable stores in America, the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop. No alarms. No flashing lights. This wasn't a show. This was the end of one. Inside, Rick Harrison was reviewing inventory with a junior employee. Chumlee was in the break room, devouring a burrito while checking his crypto wallet. Corey Harrison, noticeably, wasn't there. He had taken a few days off to attend a charity event in California. His absence would later be seen as a small miracle, sparing him from the chaos that followed. The raid was initiated at exactly 7:36 a.m. One by one, employees were pulled into the lobby, ordered to surrender their phones and stay calm. No one knew exactly what was happening, but the look on the agents' faces made it clear. This wasn't just some tax audit. They had a warrant, a thick stack of documents signed by a federal judge. The charges listed included human trafficking, interstate extortion, conspiracy to exploit minors, and large-scale money laundering. If you find this story interesting and want to learn more, don't forget to like, share the video, and leave your comments below to let us know your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on other exciting videos. Now, let's continue with the story. Rick asked to speak with his lawyer. Chumlee tried to crack a joke. No one was in the mood. The shop, once filled with historical artifacts and quirky collectibles, was now swarming with federal investigators. Every drawer was opened. Every safe was cracked. Every secret room was uncovered. The agents had come prepared. They knew exactly what they were looking for. In the basement, a space the public had never seen, there was a locked steel door disguised as part of the wall. Behind it, agents uncovered what would later be described in court as a digital vault. Servers, laptops, external hard drives, surveillance monitors, foreign language documents, contracts, and dozens of women's names, some aliases, some with no record in any public database. And the video footage, so disturbing the court later sealed it from public release. It showed young women clearly in distress, inside private rooms furnished identically to those seen in previously leaked photos from Rick's off-site properties. The videos had timestamps, dates, even audio in some cases, the kind of evidence no legal team could spin or suppress. Upstairs, in the office where Rick once worked daily, investigators found another kind of proof. Stacks of cash, hidden behind bookshelves, under floorboards, and stuffed into hollowed-out antiques. One agent reportedly counted more than $240,000 in loose bills, each one stamped and dated. Next to them were burner phones, cash, fake IDs, international wire receipts, and an encrypted list of overseas transactions. In Chumlee's desk drawer, investigators found something else. Dozens of photos of women in various stages of undress. Some were unconscious prints, not digital images, and several had dates written on the back. When questioned later, Chumlee claimed they were just souvenirs from parties. But investigators saw them as evidence of predatory behavior. The raid lasted nearly 6 hours. Once the media caught wind of what was happening, the front of the pawn shop was sealed off with yellow tape. News vans arrived, reporters scrambled for position, and helicopters circled overhead capturing aerial footage of the scene below. Crowds began to gather. Local fans, curious tourists, none of them could believe it. Many thought it was a hoax, maybe a film shoot. After all, Rick and Chumlee were TV stars, celebrities. This had to be some kind of publicity stunt. Right. Until agents escorted Rick and Chumlee into the backs of separate SUVs, handcuffed and stone-faced. That's when it hit. This wasn't a performance, a joke, or a special episode. This was real. Later that same day, FBI spokesperson Karen Mendoza held a press conference. "We have uncovered significant evidence implicating Mr. Richard Harrison and Mr. Austin Russell in an active criminal operation involving the exploitation and trafficking of young women across state lines, as well as the laundering of illicit funds through both domestic and international financial networks." She declined to answer any questions. The charges were made public the following morning. Rick Harrison, 17 federal counts including conspiracy to traffic, fraud, extortion, and obstruction of justice. Austin, Chumlee, Russell, 13 federal counts including aiding and abetting, destruction of evidence, and criminal conspiracy. The 84-page indictment laid out the details of a network that had allegedly been operating for nearly a decade, spanning multiple states and involving suspected international ties. Victims were reportedly recruited under false pretenses, fake modeling contracts, business partnerships, TV opportunities, then manipulated, coerced, or threatened into silence. Money from the operation was funneled through shell companies connected to cryptocurrency wallets, offshore real estate holdings, and even fake merchandise sales. Investigators traced over $7.8 million in suspicious transactions, all under Rick's name. The public reaction was swift. The History Channel pulled all reruns of Pawn Stars from the air. Rick's public appearances at major bookstores were canceled. His memoir was pulled from shelves, and all endorsement deals were terminated. Chumlee's product lines were shut down within hours. His candy shop closed. His social media accounts went dark. And Corey, he flew back to Vegas that same day. Upon landing, he was met by FBI agents and informed of the situation. According to a close source, he collapsed into a chair at the airport and said nothing for 20 minutes. When he finally spoke, he asked only one question. What did they find? Because even though Corey had begun to suspect something was wrong, nothing could have prepared him for the scale, the precision, the horror of what was truly happening behind the walls he had practically grown up within. The gold and silver pawn shop, now a crime scene. Its windows were sealed shut, its locks changed, its legacy shattered. What was once a cultural institution, a beacon of the past, a school of American grit and charm, is now a cautionary tale about how fame can hide the darkest truths. And the raid was only the beginning, because now the world would be watching as the trial began, as victims came forward, as evidence was presented in packed courtrooms full of journalists, activists, and former fans of Rick and Chumlee. And at the center of it all was Corey Harrison, a son forced to confront a truth too brutal to ignore, a man caught between the family he loved and the justice he could no longer turn away from. Everything had collapsed, and now the world would witness what was left. This was the trial the entire nation couldn't look away from. In the heart of Las Vegas, under the scorching desert sun, the Clark County Courthouse had turned into a fortress. Barricades lined the sidewalks. Cameras were mounted on every pole. Reporters, microphones in hand, packed in beside satellite vans to get the story. Helicopters hovered high enough to glimpse the chaos below. Monday, July 3rd. The United States versus Richard Harrison and Austin Russell. What was once a fan-favorite reality show was now the centerpiece of one of the most explosive federal criminal trials in modern entertainment history. People lined up on the sidewalk as if they were waiting for concert tickets. Not for a red carpet premiere, but to witness the downfall of men once idolized by millions. Rick Harrison, the calculating mastermind behind Pawn Stars, and his longtime friend and co-star Chumlee, real name Austin Lee Russell. They entered the courtroom flanked by U.S. Marshals. The polos and smiles were gone. In their place were orange jumpsuits, shackled ankles, and blank expressions. Their posture stiff, their hair limp. It wasn't just the weight of chains, it was the weight of what was about to unfold. The courtroom itself was locked down for security reasons. Only a select group of reporters, legal teams, and victims were allowed access. But what happened inside spread quickly across the globe. Because what unfolded in the coming weeks wasn't just a trial. It was a reckoning. Presiding over the case was Judge Naomi Richter, a no-nonsense federal judge known for her unflinching gaze and meticulous attention to detail. She had handled high-profile cases before, gang takedowns, political scandals, but even she seemed to grasp the gravity of what was happening in her courtroom. The opening statements set the tone. The prosecution wasted no time. Ladies and gentlemen, began lead federal prosecutor Elena Marquez, this case is not about celebrity. It's not about television. It's about the systemic exploitation of vulnerable human lives hidden behind the curtain of fame and wealth. The defendants used their public image to build trust, and behind the camera, they betrayed it. Marquez then took the jury down a cold path, a timeline of deceit, an operational map. She revealed that over a 10-year span, Rick Harrison and Austin Russell orchestrated a trafficking ring disguised behind their television success. The pawn shop wasn't just a business. It was a recruitment center. Dozens of young women were lured in with promises of TV appearances, job offers, even fake speaking events. Some were filmed. Others disappeared. Many never spoke, until now. On the defense side, the tone was starkly different. Rick's attorney, Wallace Mendes, leaned on what many assumed would be the only viable strategy: denial and distance. My client is a businessman, a father, a television personality, not a predator, Mendes said. We categorically deny that Mr. Harrison participated in or even knew about these alleged crimes. The prosecution, he claimed, was using circumstantial evidence and the testimony of questionable individuals to smear a man who had contributed to this country through education and entertainment. Chumlee's defense, led by attorney Jasmine Kerr, painted him as a follower, not a leader. A man swept up in Rick's world, too naive or too dependent to grasp the severity of what was happening around him. But both strategies began to unravel the moment the prosecution called its first witness. She was a young woman identified only as Maya, her identity protected. She was just 19 when she first walked into the gold and silver pawn shop. She testified that Rick Harrison himself offered her a chance to model vintage jewelry for a commercial segment. She was ecstatic. A fan of the show, a Vegas local, excited for the opportunity. But what began as a dream quickly turned into a nightmare. Her testimony described a slow, terrifying descent into coercion. She was handed exclusive contracts she didn't understand, moved between Rick's private properties, had her phone taken, was filmed, her voice threatened. Her hands shook as she spoke. The courtroom stayed silent as she cried, "I thought he was helping me, but he was selling me." The defense tried to discredit her. They pointed to inconsistencies in her timeline. They pulled up old social media posts where she was smiling in photos with Rick. They asked if she'd made up her story for attention, but she never wavered. And neither did the next three witnesses, each woman telling a different version of the same story. Lured in, trapped, exploited. All of them described Chumlee's presence, sometimes during recruitment. At other times, he was described as a follower. One witness claimed he bragged about keeping everyone in line. Another said he had locked her in a room for a week after she refused to obey his orders. Then came the digital evidence. The FBI presented a hard drive recovered from Rick's secret basement room and 2 other properties. It contained thousands of image files, videos, financial records, and emails. The jury was shown painful details of how the entire operation worked. There were clips of Rick discussing transaction logs for the girls, showing payments funneled through fake LLCs. Audio clips of Chumlee talking about routes and stops. There was nothing to suggest a misunderstanding, nothing to suggest coincidence. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from Rick himself, an audio memo buried in a secure folder labeled X Secure 2020, recorded on his own phone. In it, Rick can be heard talking to an unnamed associate. "We're protected. They'll never look here, not with the cameras pointed the other way." When that audio was played, several members of the jury visibly changed. One woman gasped, another wiped tears from her eyes. The energy in the courtroom shifted. The weight of the guilt was no longer a theory. It had been recorded. Rick's team tried to argue that the voice memo was fabricated, made up, but forensic analysis confirmed the authenticity of the audio, the voice, the phone, and the recording. Even the surrounding noise matched Rick's known home office. Then came the moment no one expected. Corey Harrison took the stand, dressed in a dark gray suit, his eyes heavy, his face pale. He didn't look like the TV personality fans remembered. No sunglasses, no cocky demeanor, just a man crushed under the weight of his name. He was sworn in and asked if he understood the consequences of perjury. He did. Then he began. "I love my dad," Corey said, his voice quiet but steady. "But love is not an excuse for what he did." He admitted that he had noticed things over the years. Money missing, just cash, shady transactions, private meetings with people who weren't customers or clients. But above all, he confessed to one night that had never been publicly discussed. When he opened a hidden drawer in his father's office and found a ledger, a list of names, dates, and codes he couldn't understand. The next morning, he asked Rick about it. Rick's response was, "Don't look into things that aren't yours." "That was the moment," Corey testified. "Something inside me changed. I stopped asking questions because I was afraid of the answer." And then he broke down. The prosecution handed him a set of photos, some of the victims, including one girl who had come to the shop years ago hoping to return. Corey stared at the photo for nearly 30 seconds in silence, then broke down. "I met her. I remember her. She just wanted to learn. I didn't know. I didn't know they'd do this to her." The judge called for a recess. The courtroom fell almost silent. Even the reporters held their tongues as they filed out, heads bowed, processing the emotional weight of what they had just witnessed. When the trial resumed, Corey apologized for losing his composure, but his testimony continued. He described how he had gradually realized the guilt of not speaking up sooner and how he decided to fully cooperate with the FBI after the arrest was made. His closing words to the jury rang out like a funeral bell. "I wish I could say I was brave enough to stop it, but the truth is, I was too scared. And I live with that every day." The courtroom went silent. No one clapped. No one cheered. There was no theatrical music or commercial break, just the raw, painful reality. The defense didn't cross-examine Corey for long. They understood his pain was real, his testimony was credible, his shame was undeniable. As the trial continued, more evidence came forward, more victims, more photos, more bank statements, forensic reports. Each day brought a new wave of horror, and each day, Rick and Chumlee sat silently. No outbursts, no apologies, no explanations. All eyes were on them. And as the trial neared its final stages, it became increasingly clear that this wasn't just a case about two men. It was about the exploitation of power. It was about how far people can go when they believe they're untouchable. And now, their time was up. For years, Austin Lee Russell, also known as Chumlee, played the lovable fool on Pawn Stars. He was the clown, the one who made people laugh, the guy who always seemed out of his depth when haggling over a broken guitar or a suspiciously fake item. She showed up unannounced at one of Rick's hidden residences. a house he once casually described as just a quiet place to get away from it all. But the moment she stepped inside, something felt disturbingly wrong. The house was too clean, too empty, too sterile, like a stage set with no actors. There were cameras, but not the kind that faced the outside for protection. No doorbell cams, no alarms. Every lens pointed inward, into the bedroom, the living area, and down every hallway. All quietly filming lavish furniture, positioned with care. But no signs of actual life. There was no toothbrush, no bottle of face wash, not a single personal photo, not even a shirt hanging in the closet. Everything was arranged like a stage, ready for a performance, but no one ever showed up to act. She looked around in silence, each step making her chest heavier. Then she noticed a small side table next to the bed. Inside were 6 cell phones, all powered off, no cases, no branding. They were from different manufacturers, but shared one thing in common. They left no trace. Next to them, a stack of foreign passports, neatly clipped together, like medical records filed away in a private clinic no one talks about. Most of the passports belonged to women, all of them under 25. Their nationalities stretched from Eastern Europe to Southeast Asia, with a few from South America. The faces in the photos were full of life, now frozen memories sealed in cold, indifferent paper. She didn't say a word. She didn't scream, didn't call for help. She simply walked out of that house, her heart pounding in her chest. That night, she didn't sleep. And then she made a decision. Enough. She had been silent for far too long. She handed over everything she had found to the authorities. No demands, no lawyer, no negotiations, just the truth. And that truth made her the key witness in a federal investigation, one that had been quietly building for over a year, with Rick Harrison at the center. Until then, the FBI had only whispers, anonymous tips, a few vague emails, and rumors buried deep in dark online forums. No concrete proof, no one brave enough to step forward. But her testimony changed everything. The investigation accelerated overnight. Undercover agents were planted inside the pawn shop. Hidden cameras were installed. Listening devices were embedded in fake merchandise. Phone records were pulled, and financial transactions were examined down to the last penny. Rick wasn't just involved in shady business. He was orchestrating an elaborate human trafficking operation. His TV fame was the perfect disguise. The pawn shop was the front door. But behind it, a labyrinth of exploitation. And the victims? They walked in chasing dreams and disappeared without a trace. They were lured in with promises, modeling shoots, TV appearances, a shot at a better life. They were told they'd be discovered, just like the celebrities before them. But instead, they were cut off from their families, moved from place to place like cargo. Many of them were never seen again. No messages, no calls, no one came looking. They vanished as if they had never existed. And those secret rooms, like the one she had stepped into, were likely the last place they left a trace. In that darkness, Rick couldn't have run it all alone. Chumlee, the name once tied to goofy antics on TV, wasn't as innocent as people thought. He recruited, he convinced, and sometimes he enforced, always staying just close enough to keep things running, but far enough to deny everything if it went south. But no one was buying the clueless act anymore. The woman, the one who uncovered it all, was the one variable the system hadn't prepared for. She was no longer an outsider. She became the only light in a room no one else dared to enter. Then came the fear. Not just of Rick, but of the things he used to say to her. That he had people in law enforcement. That certain politicians owed him favors. That he could make a problem disappear before it ever saw daylight. She used to think it was just ego talking, but now she knew better. It was a warning. She changed her number, moved out of state, added 3 extra locks to her doors. She stayed up most nights until 3 a.m., not just afraid of being killed, but of being erased. Afraid that one day she might be treated as if she had never existed. When the story finally broke, she was holed up in a cheap motel in Arizona, alone, holding the TV remote with shaking hands. Headlines ran non-stop. Rick Harrison arrested. Federal investigation uncovers shocking truth. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She just sat there and cried. Not out of relief, but out of sorrow. Sorrow for the girls who were never found. Sorrow for the people who believed in the bright, glossy lie of television. Her identity was sealed completely under court order. Even during the trial, her name was never spoken. Just a code, a pseudonym, a shadow. But everyone knew, without her, there would be no trial, no footage, no testimony, nothing. She was the key that opened the door to everything, the invisible witness that brought the truth to light. And though she's now under protection, she knows the price of speaking up never truly goes away. What drove her to speak up wasn't just what Rick had done. It was how proud he was of it. He bragged, he laughed, he pounded his chest about the things he'd hidden. He saw it all as an accomplishment, proof that he'd outsmarted the system. He didn't feel guilt. He felt triumph. And that's what haunted her the most. Because in that moment, she didn't see a con man anymore. She saw someone who truly believed he had the right to do harm and would never be caught. But now, he was caught. And she, the one who had once stayed silent, had made that happen. In her final testimony, she said one sentence, just one. But no one forgot it. It was quoted in hundreds of articles, documentaries, and press conferences. A sentence that silenced the courtroom the moment it was spoken. A sentence that shattered the illusion. A sentence she still hears in her dreams. He wasn't untouchable. I was just the first one brave enough to say it. Pawn Stars now seemed like a lie. What made Chumlee's case particularly troubling was that he had hidden in plain sight. He played the fool, relying on the caricature, becoming the comic relief, and in doing so, disarmed everyone. He made them feel safe, but behind that goofy smile was someone who was believed to know far more than he ever revealed. A person who had used his innocence as a disguise. And when the charges were laid, when his entire role was revealed, the laughter was gone. He wasn't just a side character, he was central to a system built on silence and manipulation, and now that system was crumbling. The courtroom had witnessed and heard more than most could bear. Testimonies from survivors, emotional breakdowns, damning emails, and mysterious financial traces. But nothing shook the room more than what the federal investigators presented on day 12 of the trial. The evidence gathered from coordinated raids on Rick Harrison's property archives, digital servers, and Chumlee's residences gave the jury their first horrifying and comprehensive glimpse into the infrastructure of deceit and exploitation that Rick and Chumlee were accused of building. It all began with their digital file volume. The FBI's cyber forensic team had recovered several encrypted hard drives from a steel-reinforced safe hidden beneath the floorboards in Rick's private office at the pawn shop. The safe was found behind a false wall, locked tightly with a biometric lock. Initially, Rick refused to provide the access code during his arrest, but federal agents managed to break it open within 72 hours, using bypass hardware and known login samples. What they found inside was staggering. A directory labeled with seemingly harmless names like Backup Archive and Historical Footage turned out to be camouflaged archives containing extremely disturbing content. One directory, titled Docs Alt, contained scanned passports and personal identification documents belonging to over 40 women, many of whom used aliases. Some shared the same name but different identities, indicating they were part of a created identity chain. Each file was accompanied by many handwritten notes, and Rick's handwriting, later confirmed by analysts. These notes included phrases like cooperate, resist at night, need sedatives, and move to East House. Then came the video files. According to court officials, more than 600 individual video files were recovered. These were not show episodes or behind-the-scenes footage. These were surveillance recordings from inside several of Rick's private properties. The rooms had multiple hidden cameras, often aimed at the beds, bathrooms, and hallways. The videos varied in length, content, and dates, but the pattern was clear. Women, sometimes appearing distressed or drugged, were filmed without consent. Some were interviewed, coerced, or manipulated into explaining why they were there. Others were filmed while sleeping, crying, or trying to open locked doors. Only a few minutes of these tapes were shown in court, enough to confirm their existence. The judge ordered the rest to be sealed indefinitely. A federal agent who reviewed the content firsthand stated under oath, "This isn't just a recording. These are trophies. They captured them. They controlled them. They tracked compliance." Also discovered within the encrypted folders was a file titled Operational Rules.pdf. The document read like a procedural guide, listing instructions on recruitment, housing, and silencing the women. It referenced emotional leverage, advising how to conduct background checks on social media, and included chilling phrases like, "Make them believe they're special, then make them fear being abandoned." Elsewhere in the safe, there were 3 disposable phones, one of which contained a chain of messages between Rick and an international contact discussing logistics for transporting a girl from Eastern Europe, using terms like VIP client, clean record, and no trace of paperwork. The IP addresses linked to the phone's communication were traced back to unregistered locations in Macau and Istanbul. But the physical evidence was just as troubling. Inside one of Rick's luxurious homes outside the city, a 4-bedroom property registered under a shell company, agents discovered a basement room. From the outside, the house seemed ordinary, even with a pool and a well-maintained garden. But upon entering, investigators discovered discrepancies in the floor plan. Behind a locked door in the main closet, they descended into what looked like a panic room, except this room wasn't for hiding, it was for confinement. The walls were lined with soundproofing, metal rings were bolted into the concrete floor, and a security camera was mounted in each corner, connected to an on-site recording center in one corner of the room. A mattress lay on the floor with no bed frame, no personal items, just a plastic water bottle, an empty pill bottle, and cotton swabs. Later, a sample taken from the mattress tested positive for sedatives. Blood traces were also found, matching the profile of a woman who had testified on the 8th day of the trial. In the adjacent room, shelves were filled with clothing, all of it for women, all tagged, all arranged by size and labeled with the first letter of the name. Some of the outfits were identical, indicating uniformity or control over appearance. Other items found in the house included syringes, vials containing unidentified substances, later confirmed to be powerful sedatives, and a handwritten notebook documenting arrival dates and departure statuses, some marked with check marks, others with question marks. The prosecution presented everything in an orderly, methodical fashion. Photos, reports, diagrams, and sworn testimonies from agents who entered the scene. Then came the storage unit, located in a remote area outside of Las Vegas. This unit was registered under a company named Gold Grade Holdings, which was later traced back to Chumlee. Inside, agents found backup drive boxes, old electronic devices, and several rough fabric bags filled with disposable phones. There were also thick stacks of documents containing printed materials, most of which detailed transactions not from the pawn shop, but from money transfers to obscure international destinations, Bitcoin wallets, gift card purchases, overseas wire transfers. One agent testified that the level of detail in the money laundering operation was on par with organized criminal syndicates. Then came the audio tapes from Chumlee's house. Agents recovered a small digital recorder hidden inside a safe beneath the floorboards of his bedroom closet. It contained over 50 hours of private conversations between him and Rick, with topics ranging from business plans to fears about whistleblowers exposing them to Rick. In one recording, Rick said, "We'll be fine as long as no one says we've built a fortress." The arrogance in the recording was undeniable, but it wasn't just what they said, but how they said it, laughing comfortably as if they were discussing making a reservation at a restaurant, not a crime that had destroyed lives. Perhaps one of the most shocking pieces of evidence came from a fourth property, an industrial warehouse that Rick had purchased under an alias 5 years ago. This location wasn't listed on any official documents related to the pawn shop, and Corey, along with other employees, had no idea about it. Agents discovered a studio set up with professional lighting, backdrops, and filming equipment, all of which appeared in the video. A woman, nearly unconscious, was sitting on a stool, and Rick's voice was heard off-camera guiding her to read the lines. She stammered, looking visibly scared. Later, a family member identified her as someone who had been reported missing. She still has not been found. That video was never aired. It wasn't intended to be, not for content, but for domination. The courtroom fell silent as this was described. There were no questions, no challenges, no defenses, no cross-examinations. What was there? The evidence overwhelmed the recordings, the physical items. They painted a clear and disturbing picture. Rick Harrison and Austin Russell didn't just break the law, they shattered lives. They built a horrifying house behind the scenes of a pawn shop empire, and for a decade, no one knew, or worse, no one saw. And now, everything was laid bare. The illusion of innocence had vanished, leaving only the evidence and the echoes of the lives it had destroyed. It all started with a whisper, like most buried truths, a whispered comment made in the break room of a pawn shop that had become an international brand. The comment was simple, almost forgettable. They didn't film the real things, only to stage them. The person who said that was a humble man named Brent Maloney. For 6 years, Brent worked behind the scenes at gold and silver pawn shop, mostly managing inventory and handling high-value items that never appeared on TV. He wasn't glamorous, he didn't pose for photos on Instagram, and he was never in the spotlight. But Brent was always watching. And now, sitting before the federal jury as a key witness, Brent finally spoke. He wasn't emotional. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. His voice was calm, deliberate, heavy with the knowledge he had accumulated over the years. What he said in the next 2 hours didn't just confirm the prosecution's narrative. It gave it structure. Brent's testimony focused on one idea. The show was an illusion. The pawn shop was a stage, but the real work took place in the dark, outside the frame, after the cameras were off. Pawn Stars was the front. What you saw on TV was rehearsed, cleaned up. The items were sometimes real, sometimes inserted by producers, but the money, the real transactions, that was something entirely different. According to Brent, Rick Harrison always focused on 2 things: control and secrecy. From day one, Rick emphasized 2 separate accounting systems, one for the shop's public face and one for operations. Only a few people had access to the second system. Brent was responsible for recording large, sensitive transactions, and he was one of them. He recalled dozens of instances where expensive items, such as antique weapons, foreign currency, and rare jewels, were never entered into the shop's main ledger. Instead, they were listed under coded entries like Special Item or Customer 11. These items were often temporarily stored in a locked room in the basement, then quietly removed a few days later. I once handled a 17th century ceremonial dagger worth over $80,000, Brent said. It was never aired, never seen by the public. It disappeared from the inventory in less than a week. When I asked Rick about it, he said, "VIP trade, stay away from it." But that was just the beginning. Brent stated that over the years, he noticed a pattern where some women would appear repeatedly but never as customers. They weren't there to buy or sell, they were never introduced to the other staff, most didn't speak much, and they always came through the back entrance, escorted by Chumlee or a man Brent only knew as Kevin. They didn't seem like they wanted to be there. Brent said sometimes they looked scared, sometimes they cried, sometimes they wore clothes that didn't fit. I once tried to talk to one of them, and Chumlee told me to mind my own business. Another moment that stuck in his memory. A young girl, barely out of her teens, stumbling down the hall one night after hours. She seemed clearly disoriented, and there were bruises on her wrists. Brent was alone, then spent hours trying to help her. Rick appeared from nowhere, placed his hand on Brent's shoulder and said, "You didn't see anything." He said it like a threat. Then, Brent began recording everything, not on the shop's computer, but things they were tracking. He kept a personal handwritten log stored in a locker in the nearby gym. He went there regularly, noting names, dates, license plate numbers, cash amounts. He wasn't sure why he wrote it all down. Maybe he didn't trust himself to remember. Maybe part of him hoped he would never need it, but he did. Years later, after the FBI raid, Brent was contacted by investigators. They asked if he wanted to talk. "I had been waiting for that call for a long time," he told the court. Brent handed over the journal. Investigators confirmed that many names and details matched entries found in Rick and Chumlee's encrypted files. The vehicles Brent listed were linked to real estate websites used to traffic victims. The cash was connected to international money transfers, and one specific name was boldly written on a page, dated July 11, 2020, matching a missing persons report that remained unsolved. Her name was Laya, and Brent said she had red hair. She looked terrified. That was the last time I saw her, he told the court. He also spoke about another employee who had tried to speak out, a woman named Tanya who worked in accounting. She began asking too many questions about missing receipts and strange cost codes. She was fired within a week with no explanation, no severance. I think she knew, Brent said, but she was scared. We all were. He described the pawn shop as a controlled environment, where every movement was monitored, security cameras had access codes, and confidentiality agreements were mandatory. Rick didn't just control what people saw, but also controlled what they were allowed to question. When you worked there, you quickly learned what you were allowed to notice. Brent said that the job wasn't just about selling antiques, but also about silence and smiling. Even the film crew, which he claimed played a role, though many didn't realize it. Most were independent contractors brought in to shoot staged segments. They had no idea what was actually happening behind the scenes. Their job was to make everything look fun, light, and entertaining. They thought they were making a history show, Brent said, and on the surface, they were. But the history made behind the scenes was something no one wanted to watch. He continued to detail the systematic arrangement of fake business fronts, Rick's Chumlee's candy store, even a series of short-term educational workshops on collecting every item. Brent accused these efforts of serving as a path for money laundering, victims of cash disruption, or distracting the public with shiny new content. The particularly chilling moment came when Brent described the monthly cleanup routine, which happened like clockwork. Rick would come and say, "Time for a refresh." That was the signal. Files would be deleted, items moved, hard drives replaced, cameras cleaned, locks changed. He believed these resets were done to erase digital traces or set up the scene for new operations. But perhaps the most impactful part of Brent's testimony came in his final statement. "I stayed silent because I was afraid. I saw people disappear. I saw the girls cry. I saw the truth buried under the reality TV show, and I let it happen." His voice broke for the first time. "I thought someone else would speak up, someone with more power, someone less afraid. But no one did. So here I am." When Brent stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom remained silent. Even the judge seemed to pause before continuing. It wasn't just what Brent said, but how his story deeply connected all the details, from the girls coming through the back door to the cash that never appeared in the books. Brent's testimony exposed the machinery of a criminal empire disguised as a popular TV show. And for the first time, the term Pawn Stars took on a new, ominous meaning. Because according to Brent, and the mountain of evidence that followed, those women were treated like commodities, bought, sold, and exchanged, and the show was just the cover. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like and share it with your friends and family so they can explore it too. Leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts on the chilling revelations we've shared today. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more exciting stories and shocking revelations in the future. Thank you for watching.